Good morning, everyone. A very, very warm welcome to the Scottish Parliament for the Festival of Politics. I'm Claire Adamson, MSP. I'm the MSP for Motherwell and Wishaw, and I'm convener of the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee in the Parliament. And we look forward to lively discussion. We have one panel member online, but I'm assured I'll be able to be told if he wants to come in. But I'm just going to ask the panellists to give their reflections on where we are at the moment in peace in the Middle East, and then we will be moving to maybe two questions from myself and then to the audience for participation. So there will be roving mics if people want to, if they could raise their hands, and we'll direct the Parliament staff to that. And hopefully we'll have a lively discussion. So I'm going to first of all bring in Nida and ask her just to give her opening remarks.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invite and all of you for coming today. I wish the title is quite nice of our panel, but the reality that we're about to talk about is quite grim. I think what we're looking at now is a very difficult moment in history of the region and the world. And I think I had some, thinking about it. In my view, the most difficult thing and cause of this instability. Did my microphone, is it still working? Okay, is a radicalization within the Israeli political elite that's spread into normalization within Israeli society. Israeli political scientist and former advisor to the Israeli government's negotiation team, Menachem Klein, he referred to that as kind of an obsession with a culmination from militant Zionism towards an obsession with Jewish supremacy as the answer to Israel's security. So security becomes an end in itself, and the only way to achieve it is through racial supremacy. And this is, in line with human rights and findings by international as well as Israeli organizations such as B'Tselem, Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, that what we have on the ground now is an apartheid system that connects Israel with the occupied territories and Gaza. So in a way, it's almost kind of a one unit. So it's. And this kind of discourse, which is not just rhetoric, but one that is also implemented by state policies, would lead to all forms of kind of ugly policies, whether it's genocide or the ongoing military and settler aggression in the West Bank, taking over lands and kind of changing administrative and on-the-ground realities to make impossible any future for Palestinian kind of presence on equal par, whether a state or so on. So I think, this has been a core problem that has also been enabled by key international actors. I feel like this went off. Is it working again? Right. So, the other problem is the enabling of this kind of dynamics. For example, Israel relies on a lot of military imports, and we can talk about that later, from abroad. And, these kind of imports have fueled the ongoing war and the killing of civilians and destruction of land and the environment as well. So, with that support, even when criticized, at a material level, Israel is still receiving kind of a green light almost. Of course, one recently there's been movement, and I will be talking about that, to stop this trend. And just to mention one example, so Germany is the second supplier of Israeli weapons, and they have stopped their exports of weapons to Israel. So that's perhaps a good thing. But as a recent piece in the London Review of Books by Adam Schatz said, well, would there be any Gaza left by the time this takes effect, or any people? So it's not a good situation.
Okay, I'm going to bring Jason in next, just to a few opening remarks about where you think things are at the moment, Jason. I'm not sure Jason can hear us, so on that basis, I'm going to jump to Alice Copeland, and Alice is going to give us her thoughts on the current situation.
Thanks, Claire. So I mean, as Nina mentioned, we're here under a very optimistic title, under the banner of peace in the Middle East, but I feel I can't start by saying that I don't feel we can be talking about the Middle East or peace in the region without acknowledging that there is an ongoing genocide in Gaza being committed by Israel. And this is the assessment of organisations and individuals, including UN expert Francesca Albanese, Amnesty International, Oxfam, B'Tselem, Reporters Without Borders, Human Rights Watch, and prominent scholars on genocide. So I think with that in mind, before we could even begin talking about peace, there needs to be a series of actions taken immediately. First and foremost, stop and finding a way towards a ceasefire. We'll see what happens. I agree to that, and I can talk more about that later. I think there needs to be full access for international agencies to deliver aid, which will stop starvation that's ripping through the Gaza Strip, and we also need the full return of all hostages that were captured by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023. And I think it's only by acknowledging that starting point could we begin to have an honest conversation about how we could have peace moving forward. We really need to appreciate the depths of the conflict in the Middle East at this time and the challenge we have ahead. This is a diametric shake-up in the region. Nothing's the same, and we have to move away from a business as usual way of thinking about how we might approach this conflict. And I'm saying we as in the international community that's engaged with this region for so long. And I think part of that process for moving forward will be having a reckoning for how the international community allowed a genocide to take place in Gaza. And, genocide isn't just about killing, it's about preventing the conditions of life moving forward. So similarly, survivors of genocide have a whole process to go through. This cannot be just a sort of the day after situation where everything can kind of resume as normal. And I think with that, the final thing I would say is, on this kind of initial thoughts would be, we also need to think about what kind of peace we're looking for. So is this peace that's simply silence or the absence of violence, or is it a longer term sustainable peace that would be rooted in justice, accountability and equality? I would say we need to be aiming for the latter. I don't think that would be a controversial thing to say. I think as the international community, and particularly the US and the UK, has focused on this kind of short-term, quick fix solution to the question of Palestine, and that has meant that we've been sitting for so many decades in a mode of conflict management rather than resolution. I mean, you just have to think about what Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said just a week before October 7th, where he said, the Middle East region is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. And I think that highlights the kind of thinking that we've had for so long and we'll need to move past if there's going to be a sort of realistic prospect of finding a durable solution to this conflict, especially given where we stand today.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Peter, and then we'll try Jason lastly again.
Thanks. I don't disagree with the substance of what's already been said at all. I think that the current government, the Netanyahu government in Israel, is probably the most formidable and obdurate obstacle to peace in the Middle East that there is. But there are obviously, in any conflict, two sides, and there is, I think, also something to be said for the need for Israel to be secure, and that, I think, is dependent on the fundamental position from which one departs. My own position, to be absolutely clear, is that the State of Israel exists. It has a powerful military, obviously. It has a formidable nuclear arsenal. It's not going anywhere. It has the right to defend itself. But I also think that any friend of Israel, and I don't know if I would go so far as to call myself a friend, would be obliged to say, I think, that Israeli defense and security policy over the last 25, 30 years has been inimical to Israel's long-term security. Israel's in a very secure position at the moment because it has degraded Hamas. It's one of its adversaries. It has also degraded and almost destroyed Hezbollah. It has dealt a formidable blow to the sponsors of Hezbollah and Hamas, Iran. And the problem is that this doesn't give it much immediate incentive to negotiate. And if it doesn't negotiate in the long term, it will never be secure. What it's doing now is it's breeding a brand new generation of implacable enemies to its existence across, not only in the immediate region, but now across the world. Israel's standing in the world is so much weaker than it was on October 8th, 2023. And this is a real problem. But there's another side to the equation, and that is that Hamas is a medieval death cult and is no more interested in having security in the long term than Israel. Hamas, in conjunction with Iran, made a bid to put the question of Palestine back on the international agenda because it wasn't after the Abraham Accords of September 2023. And so it made a political bid, but its political bid was a horrific war crime. Yeah, it was absolutely horrific. The problem, if one's trying to see a way forward, is that Israel has squandered all of the goodwill it might have enjoyed by perpetrating, if not genocide, and I'm more and more coming around to the idea that it might be perpetrating genocide, has certainly from day one been perpetrating the most grotesque violations of international humanitarian law. And so as long as these two elements are the chief negotiators, like my colleagues, I don't see much chance for peace. However, the international community is finally altering its position. On the 29th of July, in fact, there was a meeting in New York around the United Nations where 17 important actors agreed on a position, including the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Turkey, and others, that they wouldn't wait for the position had been, in conjunction with the United States, from the Western powers especially, that they wouldn't recognize a Palestinian state until there had been prior preliminary Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. And what that did was give Israel a veto over Western recognition of a state of Palestine, and therefore made it impossible, in practical terms, to move forward with the Oslo Accords of 2023, which envisaged a Palestinian state, the two-state solution. Not only that, the Israeli government, especially the actors in charge now, had been actively sponsoring the construction of Israeli settlements on the West Bank in direct violation, by the way, of various international legal commitments that Israel had made. And so the West has finally decided, if there isn't movement on the part of Israel towards Palestinian statehood by the upcoming UN General Assembly, that they will recognize officially a Palestinian state. And they've departed from the United States in doing this. And my view is that this doesn't hold out much hope for the tragic situation in Gaza, but it does point a way forward for the future. And so I think there may be some hope for the future, but in the meantime, I fear that the human tragedy in Gaza, the deaths of millions, the starvation and deaths of millions through Israeli military action is likely to continue.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to hopefully go to Jason, if he can hear us now. Good morning. It's very early in the morning where you are, I know, so thank you for joining us from where you are in the States.
Good morning. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be here, even if virtually. I missed the first few minutes of intros and thoughts, so I will be brief and excuse me, my remarks, and I'm always somewhat intimidated by the credentials of the people on these panels. So I'm probably the least smart person offering an opinion this morning. I will say that words and language matter, and as somebody who has spent part of his career advocating for a stronger relationship between the United States and Israel, and somebody who has worked in and out of Jewish organizations for a very long time, I think it is important to recognize that we can hold multiple truths, however subjective they may be, at the same time as we look to have a conversation about what's happening in Gaza. I have long advocated for a two-state solution, and I have long held the principle that it is possible to both love and cherish the idea, if not the practice, of a Jewish state, and at the same time also feel passionately for the reality of a Palestinian state and for the rights of Palestinians to have self-determination. I feel more strongly about that today than I have ever. We can agree to disagree, and I'm certain we will continue to talk about whether or not what we are seeing in Gaza today is a genocide, or rather, is it just a human tragedy, neither of which, by the way, is particularly pleasant to hear. But I do think that it's important to recognize, as we talk about Israel, much like being an American, where I would like to think that people don't hold me personally accountable, nor do they view the United States as simply a function of our leadership, of President Trump, that it is important to recognize that Israelis are both struggling with what they see. Also remember that they don't see everything that we see, because the state does have some degree of censorship over what Israelis do see. But it is a reality that hundreds of thousands of Israelis protest in the street daily against the current government. And a vast majority of Israelis would want to see Bibi Netanyahu resign. So I just think it's important, as we continue to discuss this, to recognize that when we talk about Israel and we talk about what's happening with the Palestinians, and I think Peter touched on this just a bit, I think both sides and the people of both Israel and the Palestinians have been terribly misled, and the failure of leadership both in Palestine and in Israel has led us exactly to where we are today. And while I am an optimist by nature, my ability to see a path forward, it grows increasingly dark. I take some confidence and hope in the fact that young people are more engaged on this topic, both in Israel and in Palestine and across the world, and that hopefully, if we continue to shine a light on what's happening there, that we will inch, however slowly, towards some kind of resolution.
Thank you very much, Jason. The issue of statehood has come up from all the panellists, I think, so far. And we have seen some movement on the international stage about the recognition of a two-state solution. It's something my own party has supported for many years. I am a little perturbed that it seems to be used as a bargaining chip at the moment. To my mind, if there's an argument and a reason to have statehood, you know, that should be sort of on its own and not part of any other negotiation. But I would be interested in the panellists' view on this. So I'm going to go to Alice first this time.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there. I think recognising Palestinian statehood is a welcome step, but I think, kind of based on what I said before, we're in such a difficult situation now. It's not going to be the kind of silver bullet that might resolve the situation. And I think also, you know, the debate over Palestinian statehood and recognition has gone on for years, and in that, and you know, it's very much linked to a two-state solution. But in that time, and whilst that debate's continued, the situation and the context on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza has deteriorated in such a way that that's becoming, I mean, a lot of people will now say that's impossible anyway. If you just think, even just like Israel's finance minister said he will proceed with the E1 settlement project that buries the idea of a Palestinian state, and that, you know, tenders have been approved or will be approved to build more than 3,000 housing units in the West Bank. So I think, you know, acknowledging a Palestinian state is essentially recognising the Palestinians' equal right to self-determination. I don't think that's a gift. I don't think that has to relate to any other wider process or bargaining tool. And yeah, as I sort of said, you know, I wouldn't want recognition of Palestinian state to again be seen as a kind of quick fix. And I think there's a real risk as well. You know, Jason mentioned how many young people are engaged with this debate now. And I think if there was recognition of a state and then no further tangible action, that could probably do more harm in the sense of, well, not harm, but it would create further challenges in our political space for people feeling increasingly frustrated that nothing seems to be happening practically on the ground.
Okay. Nita, do you want to come in?
I mean, there are two things. One, I think the UK's position has been criticised exactly because it sounds like a threat. And then, you know, others have also pointed out that this is a useless exercise given that there are no, you know, there's no room for two states anymore. But in my view, this is a radical step in the right direction. Again, you know, at the start of my previous intervention, I mentioned Menachem Klein's view on what's wrong with Israeli politics, which is this idea that Israel's security is the main point of any negotiations, any settlement, and this has been going on for over 20 years and getting more and more radical, where we cannot trust the Palestinians for anything. And if you look at the details of negotiations from the start, you know, Israel had always wanted to keep all sovereign rights and give the Palestinians not much, right? You know, and turn them into kind of, you know, in a way, normalize the apartheid system. So a two-state, or not a two-state, sorry, a recognition of Palestinian state changes that. So it's you know, it kind of flips the logic. It's no longer a military logic about security and militarization and so on, but actually a political, diplomatic, you know, first solution, or, you know, a way of looking at the issue. It's, I think, you know, I've read some views by international lawyers like Victor Qattan at Nottingham, and you know, this is a technical stuff, I wouldn't know, but then, you know, the point is, you know, recognizing a Palestinian state goes beyond recognizing recognition for self-determination, and actually this is a recognition for Palestinian sovereignty over its own land. That's the major kind of shift in understanding what's going on. And then, Israel at that point will be forced to mark its borders, right? So it's no longer, borders are no longer the point of negotiation, but actually now it's a given, if we all agree that there is another state there, or, a people. It will allow it will open a path for Palestinian political and diplomatic action, and allows for international support through these means rather than supplying weapons and running proxy wars. So I think it's a very overdue, but we shouldn't dismiss it, and we should encourage it. Right. So I think that's what I think about it.
Okay. Peter, would you like?
I don't have a huge amount to add, but Palestine's right to statehood is entrenched in international law through the Oslo Accords of 1993, and it's just been a path to getting there. And ironically, I think, and tragically, Israel has been providing the Palestinian people with the most powerful argument imaginable that they must have their own state, and not only state, but as Nita has just said, a delineated territory. I mean, there was territory tentatively earmarked or designated for a Palestinian state in the Oslo Accords, and the Israelis have been building settlements on it since the early 2000s. So it's an intractable situation, but without statehood, Palestine will never be able to assure its own security. Now, the flip side to that, and this is more in agreement with Alice, 147 states within the UN General Assembly already recognize Palestinian statehood, and that hasn't made that much difference to the situation on the ground. The hope is that if European states move their weight in behind this position, that will put more pressure on Israel, but frankly, that remains to be seen.
Okay. Just before I bring in Jason, I wonder if I could also put this in the context, Jason, of who are the people who are most able to influence this situation on the world stage? Are they looking elsewhere at the moment on other areas? Who needs to be round the table to make the situation negotiable and better?
So I think if I'm going to be always the person who follows after Peter, I'm just going to keep saying the same thing he says, which is I have very little to add because the panelists are so thoughtful about this and contribute so much of their time, so much more of their time to thinking about it than I do. I would simply say this, Claire. State building is a tricky business. If you're looking specifically at the region, there is no state of Israel without the United States. And as we think about the Palestinians and the sheer number of times that there has been some kind of a deal on the table where there have been offers of 97, 98, 99% of clarified boundaries. And for me, the question will continue to come back to this. When we're talking about granting statehood as a concept versus the actual reality of running a state, it has been unclear to me, and it remains unclear to me, who exactly is going to run a Palestinian state. It's clear, the comment that Alice made earlier about what Jake Sullivan had said prior to October 7th, that the region had been quiet. And I agree that simply having a quiet region can't be the barometer for success. But Hamas had time, all kinds of time, to build a functioning infrastructure that would enable running Palestine as a state, and yet chose to do quite honestly the opposite. And I would simply posit as a question, almost a Socratic question to the question you've asked is, I don't know who the Israelis or the Brits or the Americans or the UN or any other third party, I don't know who they're supposed to be negotiating with. I don't know what the expectations are for what metrics of success should be. Say what you will about the current Israeli government. At least there is something that appears to be a functioning democracy with levers and checks and balances. We can have a long conversation about my views on the Netanyahu government, but the Palestinians, the idea of granting the Palestinian statehood without anything that resembles a functioning leadership structure, to me, that's where the conversation has to begin. It's not about recognizing Palestine as a state. Peter said it, 147 countries have recognized their right to statehood. Who's running the show? It's clear to me that nobody is. And that is, I think, to me, the beginning of the conversation about what's next for the Palestinians.
I'm going to bring in other panels very quickly on that point, and then we'll go to questions. Please get your hands ready and questions ready for coming in. But very quickly, Nida.
Yeah, just, I mean, there's a qualitative difference when you have 4 out of the 5 members of the Security Council recognizing a Palestinian state. These are not random states that are recognizing Palestine. These are very powerful allies of the United States and Israel who are doing that. So I think, it's this numbers game does not, do well here. I'm with all due respect, but the logic Jason brought is very much colonial mandate logic, right? Are these people even capable of negotiating to begin with? I mean, perhaps take a step back and ask, why is there no functioning leadership structure in Palestine or among the Palestinians? It's been kind of an attrition of Palestinian civil society, Palestinian political action, since the Intifada, the first one, right? And the first Intifada was, quite peaceful, quite, economically as well oriented, was not militarized. And then if you look at rather than rhetorical moves, and actually, which many Israeli, scholars and writers have looked at and diagnosed, in a very critical way, Israel has been responsible for militarizing not only Israeli society, but Palestinian society as well. So, it has the power there. With power comes responsibility. And, this is, so I think, it's about time we start talking about people with equal dignity and I think a democratic solution rather than one wherein there are some who are able to rule because they have traditions that we approve of, and others cannot, is very much, falls into the same logic of racial domination, to be honest. So I think we should start to move away from that and move to something new, different, democratic, and inclusive for everybody.
Any more to add, Peter?
I don't think I could add anything useful at all to what's already been said. I agree. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, nothing much more than what's been said. I think I agree. And, it is frustrating when you look at leadership in Palestine, because there are, as Nida said, there's an active civil society, engagement from grassroots, women-led organisations, for example, and young people. But there's a context that has to be considered, and a wider context of occupation that has to be considered within this. But I think Jason really wanted to.
Oh, did you want back in, Jason? Sorry.
Yeah, and I appreciate the point of view that that Nita brings. I'm not, and I apologize if it seemed that way. I in no way am suggesting that Palestinians aren't capable of negotiating. Mine is just a more practical question. If statehood were granted tomorrow and the adults were brought to the table to negotiate what that looks like, I simply want to know who that is, and to look back historically. And again, I don't know that you're going to find a more pro-Israel person who is also as sympathetic and is pro-Palestinian state. I simply wonder how many times have we seen real deals on the table, real opportunities for peace. And again, I'm not absolving the Israelis of their share of blame here, but I just, as a practical matter, this is not an academic exercise. I'm not talking about some sort of philosophical, aspirational what if. I would simply ask, and it is a question not necessarily for the panel, but it's just a question I ask when I read the news and I try to think about what the next stage looks like. I simply don't understand who is at the table negotiating on behalf of the Palestinian people for what a Palestinian state looks like. It is an honest, simple question, probably coming from an underinformed point of view. I don't see someone who can negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians. By the way, and I hope to God that it isn't Netanyahu negotiating on the other side, because I have very strong thoughts about him.
Okay. I think it's time we. The mic's coming. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. I was very struck by Jason's point, actually. He used the term failure of leadership. And I, like him, I can't see, and I didn't hear what he said as a colonial hangover. It is the question of what is the capability of the present people in power in both the Palestinian Authority and in Hamas. But I think it's wider than that too, which is what is the role of the leaders of the other Arab countries in the region, because we're talking about the region as a whole, I think, not just about Israel and Palestine.
Does anyone want to lead on that one? Or
Can? Yeah.
Sorry, Peter. Thanks.
I think it's an excellent point. I agree entirely that in some ways I think a lot of the other Arab nations have been let off the hook for their role in trying to promote a just solution to the Israel-Palestine question. For years, many of them adopted a kind of a rhetorical position of critical of Israel and demand for a Palestinian state without doing very much. And then, as I alluded to the Abraham Accords in 2020, which were negotiations between a number of key Arab states and Israel to try and normalize relations between them, which threatened to marginalize the question of Palestine, justice for Palestine. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why Hamas acted. I don't agree. I understand why they acted. I don't agree at all with their strategy. I think it's been enormously counterproductive. But that's very important. And the question of Egypt, especially, that came up in a conversation we had earlier, is crucial. Egypt has not been very helpful in trying to support the people in Gaza, partly because Egypt does not want another refugee camp on Israel borders, which then would let the Israelis off the hook for looking after and rebuilding the damage they've done to Gaza. But it's an enormously difficult question, which the Arab world has a huge role to play, and I'm remiss for not having mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think if anyone has to play it all, I think it's the United States, to be honest. The United States under Biden, for example, gave $18 billion worth of weapons to Israel. And Trump so far, I think, $7 billion recently. So whether there is a Palestinian counterpart and a state structure already existing that we can just hand in a Palestinian state for, which I find really, it's not about being philosophical. Actually, it's more of a logical question. Well, is besides the point when we are still funding and sending streams of weapons. So how about we stop that first, and then we'll start to look at how a Palestinian structure would look like.
Not just the United States. The United Kingdom's been selling arms to Israel as well, and so have many European countries. It's a wider question than just the United States, but I agree that it's...
Not true, because I looked up the statistics, and the United States, Israel's import of weapons, 2/3 of the imports come from the United States, 1/3 comes from Germany, followed by Italy, and then so the United States is the main source of weapons import for Israel. 2/3, and this was, I looked it up on, I can tell you, the German news agency, the official, Germany comes second.
But Germany have stopped.
Has stopped,
now,
yes.
Which is something the United States hasn't done. Alice, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just very briefly on the role of regional states, and I think speaking about the region more broadly as the kind of this event, there have been real, I think, shifts in the region in the last sort of few years. Even I think with everything moving so quickly, we forget that it was not long ago that Saudi Arabia and Iran had a rapprochement that has seemed to have held for the last 2 years, despite a number of kind of diplomatic difficulties that have taken place. I think in terms of the role of Arab states, we can't forget that we've had the Arab Peace Initiative on the table for decades now. And I think in terms of who will be crucial outside of the region, I think it's the US. I think it's always going to be the US that holds the most cards within the international community. You can see that even with the weight that Netanyahu has, given to building and maintaining a relationship with Trump. I think within the region, Saudi Arabia is key. We saw that prior to the 7th of October, Joe Biden was really pushing to have Saudi normalization with Israel. People were saying that was what he wanted to be his kind of foreign policy piece. And that would be, I think, very difficult for Saudi Arabia, and particularly now that I don't think that would be something that Mohammed bin Salman could pursue without having sort of widespread protests from the Saudi Arabian public. And I think in terms of the Abraham Accords, if that can be seen as a kind of regional effort at peace, I think it was very misguided, and it was a way to kind of try and achieve economic cooperation without considering the root cause of the issue. And I think we saw how that's played out. But yeah, I think that would be my kind of assessment of the region, as Saudi Arabia is a key player. But yeah, I think, on what you said as well, there has been a failure by regional states to address this issue also.
I'm going to bring in the audience again. You have a lady in front left here.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the chance. I'm sitting here very angry. I want to ask, why have Palestinians not been, as somebody said, able to run the show? If you look at the long term from Balfour onwards, you will see that there is a European-based, more or less, agreement that they want a so-called ally to stop a Palestinian state being a proper Palestinian state. Who is in prison at the moment, being tortured, threatened? Marwan Barghouti. Why has there been no campaign from the British to release that person who is regarded universally as a potential unifier of Palestinian politics and people? Why is it that so many Palestinians, potential leaders, young people who have no chance now of being raised up to take charge and to be a Palestinian, as it were, progressive leader, why is it that educated Palestinians are abroad in huge numbers, unable to go back and take charge? Why? Let's just think about that question and look in the long term, right back to British imperial policy in the 19th, 20th century.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the historian first on that one, Peter, for comment.
Oh, I sympathise entirely. I think that the British role in the Israel-Palestine question was fundamental. It's kind of an origin story. The Balfour Declaration recognized the rights of the Jewish people to a homeland in the region without considering the fact that there were Palestinians living on the same land. And then when there was a virtual civil war after the Second World War between Israelis and Palestinians, and even into the 1930s, the British were unable and unwilling to impose, to stand up for the rights of Palestinians in particular, and more or less left the region the way they left the region on the Asian subcontinent in quite a fantastic mess. So I agree entirely with what you're saying about the kind of the historical roots and the role of British imperialism.
Anyone else want to come in, comment on that one? Jason, yeah?
Yet again, I don't have too much to add, but I will say someone like Marwan Barghouti is exactly the kind of person who a more responsible Israeli leadership would understand has to be central to any to trust building and for the Israelis to have credibility as partners in any kind of a peace process. I guess they said only Nixon could go to China. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right analogy, but I do think that risks will have to be taken on both sides. Leaps of faith, and Israeli prisons are full of a lot of people who have to play some kind of constructive role in this process. Not to get into the fact that there are a lot of people there who probably should be there, but this particular government has been egregious in their inability to recognize their responsibility in furthering the process.
I'm looking for further questions in the room.
Can I just add?
Oops, yes, of course, Alice. Sorry.
Just to say I completely agree with you, and I'm sure you will have been as horrified as I was to have seen the footage that was released of Marwan Barghouti in prison just a few days ago being taunted by a member of the Israeli coalition government. And it was a point I tried to draw on just now, but you are right. There is a whole swell of educated, ambitious, smart young people in Palestine who do not have the opportunities to create the kind of new leadership that they would want to see and who have been let down. And I think that has been driven by a deepening and violent occupation that has taken place in their land.
Thank you. Can I have the hands up again? Is the young lady at the back over here? Thanks.
Thank you. My question is for Peter, although interested to hear anybody's opinion on it. I should start by saying I don't condone violence at all. I do believe, however, though, if one group of people has the right to defend itself, then everybody should have that right as well. I was quite surprised to hear you use the term death cult in reference to Hamas during a discussion on peace. It's quite an inflammatory term, particularly from such an educated and experienced person like yourself, and I think goes to show your true position here. My understanding, albeit less educated than you, I'm not a professor, is that Hamas were democratically elected and have built schools, hospitals, etc., in addition to having their military wing. So my question then is how you define death cult, and how many of the Israeli state's and military's actions you might also define under this term, taking into account the indoctrination of Israeli citizens, Israeli propaganda, and the genocide that we're witnessing, and given it is clear that Israel has committed many, many war crimes.
That's a very easy question for me to answer. On the 7th of October, 2023, what Hamas did in targeting young people, okay, in murdering and raping women, decapitating bodies. And although I don't believe anything I see in terms of media coming either from Gaza or especially from Israel, there is no doubt that those atrocities were committed. And by even calling them war crimes, I was giving Hamas credit as a political actor, which would have made many Israelis begin shouting at me. Yeah? So I agree that they're a political actor in the region, but what they did on the 7th of October was beyond the pale. It was beyond the kind of limits of my imagination of kind of horrific political acts, okay? To target civilians in that way, right? Even given some of the kind of the revolutionary doctrines of asymmetric warfare, that was far beyond, and it was purposefully far beyond, because Hamas's leadership didn't want to negotiate with Israel. Okay, once negotiations happen, Hamas will be marginalized. Okay, and as far as democratic elections that elected Hamas, I don't recognize that as a democratic process. I just don't. Now, on the other side, you have. If you want me to kind of ask me how I would characterize the Netanyahu government, you have people like Bezalel Smotrich, Gideon Saar, Israel Katz. Okay? These people have come out from the beginning in favor for decades of illegal settlements designed to undermine any hope of peace in the United States. They have, in Israel, for Israel-Palestine and the Oslo Accords. Okay? They have come out and made statements which are genocidal, without question. Okay? So why do I have to stand for either of these actors? I don't. Okay? I'm not ever going to recognize Hamas as a legitimate political actor, nor do I give the Netanyahu government, especially as it's currently constructed, I recognize they're not a legitimate political actor either. Okay? Neither of them are, and as long as they're in charge, there is no hope for peace. There is no hope for peace.
Can I bring Dita in?
Yeah, just quickly on that, maybe not so quickly, we'll see. But I think we need to also move out of this reductive logic that it's Israel versus Hamas. I mean, I agree what Hamas did on October 7, we can explain it, but we can't really justify it. I think there's a big difference between understanding where it came from and justifying it. So it's not justifiable. At a moral level, even at a political level, it's not justifiable. So in that sense, I do agree. But, of course, people have explained it, as, again, it's legacies of occupation and so on. So I think we need to, if we're thinking about peace and sustainable peace, to move out of these reductive conversations over the effects and rather look at the causes and where we're going. So, I think, as I said before, Palestinian political scene had a lot more variety, it was a lot more vibrant, but then systematic Israeli crackdown kind of, and occupation has undermined all of that. I mean, not just Marwan Barghouti, few days ago, there was a profile of Zakaria Zbedi in the New York Times, who, as a young person growing up in Jenin refugee camp, actually joined the Freedom Theatre group, which, you know, they believed in were working for a one-state, democratic state. And then the Israeli founder was assassinated, the group was undermined, and Zakaria Zbedi became a militant, right? And in that interview, he said he gave up all hope. And why did he give up hope? It's not because Palestinians don't have democracy. They couldn't have it even if they wanted to when they are living under occupation. So I think, you know, what we really, if we're thinking about sustainable peace, at the core of it is justice, and you know, and the international community plays a big role. I'd love for both, you know, the Hamas members and the Israeli government members who have, you know, been mentioned in the International Criminal Court to actually face a tribunal, right? And the same thing with the International Court of Justice, to see that go ahead. And, you know, and this is why I think this recognition of a state can take us, you know, is a step toward in that direction, rather than this kind of nitty-gritty, you know, do we have the technical answers there? And because politics is about imagination, and politics is about trying to find new ways rather than being you know, dig in what we have.
Did you want to go in, Alice, on that one? Jason, I'm just giving you an opportunity if you want to.
Everything Nita just said, I applaud. Politics is about imagination, and imagination is rooted in the future, not the past. I think it is a point that is often lost with no blame, that for Jews who are taught at a very early age about what happened 90 years ago, 80 years ago, it's something that it's ingrained in our psyche. And while it's something that I reference regularly, I also appreciate and recognize the need to be more forward-facing, and I appreciate the points that are made about desperation and militantism that is rooted in the Palestinian reality over the last 60 years. And at the same time, I also recognize that whether it's those who see themselves as more pro-Palestine than pro-Israel, talking about the Palestinian plight for the last 60 years, or whether it's those of us who maybe see themselves more as pro-Israel than pro-Palestinian, referencing sort of our reality rooted in Germany in the 40s. Neither side is going to succeed unless we collectively are able to not abandon that sort of historical reality, but be able to face forward, and the creativity of politics as a way forward, I think, is a critical point that more people should embrace.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the time. I think we've got time for one more question, and then we'll go to closing remarks. Can I see hand up again? Gentleman in the second row, you've hand up quite a while. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, just on going back to a couple of questions ago about the funding from, the provision of arms from America. Totally agree with the good doctor there. I think the point that other countries also supplied arms is a little bit of a weak point, to be honest, because if America said no, virtually nobody else would supply arms. And I think that the power of America cannot be understated. They gave explicit permission for them for Netanyahu to make Israel safe. What a vague statement that is. If somebody throws a rock, you're not safe, so he can do whatever he wants. He's got carte blanche until America turn around and say stop and oppose them. Not just stop supplying with them arms, that will carry on. But my actual question was regarding the negotiations. I'm sorry, I don't know his name, the gentleman on the screen, saying who they're going to negotiate with. if anybody, whether it's the gentleman in prison or anybody else, stepped up to negotiate for Israel, I can't see as it would be any different than Ukraine trying to negotiate with Russia. There is no equality of negotiation. When you've got a country who you said from the outset are extremely well armed in their own right, without all the support from America and other countries, but also the situation with Ukraine and Russia, hopefully it gets resolved, but it's only been resolved because the power of America is saying to the small country, the equivalent here being Gaza, saying, you haven't actually got any power to negotiate. You need to do what you're told, and then we might get to a settlement. And to me, there's huge responsibility for America, and we can couch it wherever we want. They're not the only ones responsible, but we can't just keep avoiding it and saying, it's not all our fault, other people are a bit at fault as well, or greatest respect to the lady behind me, yes, mistakes were made in the past. That's not how we're going to move forward. We've got to make, or not just recognise state. The gentleman made the point that loads of countries have recognised Gaza. It's made no real difference. So what's going on at the moment, some more countries might recognise them. That's not what's going to solve it. We've got to support, I mean, internationally, stop just supporting the influence of Israel. I appreciate Israel are important in the Middle East, and there's loads of political influence behind that are supporting Israel, not because they think Israel's right, but because they fear a weak Israel will make the whole region harder to deal with. I'm sorry, that's a very complicated thing, but my big point is we can't just say, oh, there's nobody to negotiate with, so we can't negotiate. Oversimplification of what you were saying, I appreciate. But I hope you take my point from that. I hope I've got some information across. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone want to comment on that one? No, I think we could take... Peter, sorry.
Well, I do think that we probably haven't talked enough about the United States and its role. And I don't agree that the United States controls the policies of other countries, shipping arms. But they just don't. I mean, the UK Parliament tomorrow could pass a law imposing an arms embargo on Israel. They just could. That's just a fact. But American policy and American leadership in the world has resulted in Israel getting almost unqualified support. And this is, I suppose, not being helpful, but the room is obviously fundamentally pro-Palestine. I'm pro-Palestine myself, but I don't think that we can be simplistic and argue that it's all America's fault and we have no response. I'm Canadian, by the way. In all of this, it's not. And understanding American support for Israel is very difficult from the outside. To understand the level of unqualified support Israel has received from the United States for many decades is difficult. There's a really interesting book on the subject by a couple of people that I know well, John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt, called The Israel Lobby. And two Jewish academics who wrote a book condemning the power of the Israeli lobby in American politics. And it's a fact of life. But just for the rest of the world to say, it's all America's fault, it's all the fault of American power, that I think that's avoiding responsibility as well.
Okay.
That's what was said, though.
Yeah.
Well, it's what I heard anyway.
Alice, do you want to say anything else? Or?
No, I just don't think. I think there's a huge role for the US, and I do think they hold the cards in terms of what the international community could do. I don't think this conversation has been entirely relating to just that this is the US's fault. But yeah.
Nida, you wanted to, I know you went into Jason.
Oh, wait, Jason can go first. It's,
Jason, do you want to go first?
If you don't mind, I apologize. The Mearsheimer and Walt thing is interesting. And look, full disclosure, if anyone went online and looked at my bio, I used to work for the Jewish lobby. I worked for AIPAC. I would simply want to point out that even among those of us who have been affiliated with AIPAC over the years, and I was their deputy political director. American Jews and Jews really worldwide are struggling with this in a way that I think is hard to understand unless you are in it and are experiencing it. And I don't mean to make this about the Jews, because it's not. But there is not this sort of uniform, homogenous view among Jews that it is pro-Israel and anti-Palestine. I think if you look at the marches in Israel, the hundreds of thousands of Israelis who are marching, if you look at the marches and the protests that are happening here in the United States, where American Jews are infighting among ourselves about how to navigate an incredibly difficult situation. I just want to make it clear that even as we talk about the influence of the United States, and now I'm injecting this new thing about Jews and American Jewry, but there is no uniformity either in the United States. Polling shows that right now it's a third. But even among American Jewry, and I would just ask, and I submit this humbly, that if any of you know someone who is Jewish, don't assume that you know because they are Jewish what they think about what their views are on Palestine, and at least be aware that this is something that Jews are struggling with, both personally and in our sort of cohort. It is not black and white.
Nita?
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you went first, because it's building on that point. You know, I think it's not accurate to say that the Israel lobby is a fact of life. I think there is, you know, at the moment we see a lot of. I think, like Jason said, you know, especially among American Jews, a lot of criticism and bringing up the question of anti-Semitism and how linked and challenging it's linked to criticizing Israel as a state. So I think there is a whole. I think we are going through a paradigm change, and we do need to be able. I think in your first remark. Be able to hold multiple truths, but you know, at the same time, and they shouldn't. One should not cancel the other. Or maybe I can speak more directly. You know, to be pro-Palestine is not to be anti-Semitic. To criticize Israel is not to be anti-Semitic, and one should not be. I mean, that's the other thing, right? So you know, and this meant, you know, I think this is what I try to begin my intervention with, this whole fixation. And again, you know, as I said, it's not just me who thinks that, but, you know, Israeli and Arab scholars and thinkers have all said that. This fixation on security feeds into that identity politics that is exclusive, you know, at the exclusion of others and domination. And we need to move beyond that. I mean, I don't think the region was stable. I mean, it's only stable depending on who you ask. I mean, the region, the Middle East, has been going through major instability since the American invasion of Iraq. We've seen many states fragment since then. And if you look at a lot of new books that are coming out by investigative journalists, a lot of strong support for the war came from neocons and their Israeli allies in Washington, portraying the invasion of Iraq as a security, you know, something to make sure that we eliminate the security threat, right, and change the regime. And what did that bring? That brought ISIS, that brought, you know, Al-Qaeda into the region, that brought a proliferation of militias that have taken over, you know, countries all around in the region. And I think this is quite dangerous. So this security logic have always led us to more and more problems. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I think we need to move beyond that.
Thank you. I'm going to move to. If you have anything else to add in closing remarks, Nida? Or
that's my closing remark.
Okay. Okay. I shall bring in Alice next.
Yeah, I'm very conscious. I'll go into fifth gear, but yeah, I just building on what I said at the beginning, I think we need to, well, first of all, stop genocide in Gaza, but also have a transformational shift in how we might approach this region, and that will involve truly centering the voices of people on the ground and listening to voices from the region, and only then might we have a shift that could lead to a sustainable, durable outcome to this conflict that's rooted in justice and accountability.
Peter?
I think back to the Oslo Accords in 1993, and I was in my 20s at the time, and it was such a period of hope. And that was a kind of a moment of a very hopeful moment in the history of international politics. And then it's been my generation that, and I suppose the generation just before me, that has been in charge, and we've left an awful mess for the younger generation to manage. And I agree with Nita that the invasion of Iraq was another one of those moments where we've never recovered. And I'm hopeful for the future. I'm hopeful for a younger generation that might view justice as more important. I've found the conversations I've had with my son about this to be inspirational, but I worry that what's going on in Gaza, and has been going on for 2 years almost, is going to create a generation that is much more radicalized and hostile to the prospects for peace, especially in the Arab world. And it's just very sad, and I feel very, very dismal at the moment about the way forward. But the politics of imagination, as Nita said, are really our only hope. So,
Final thoughts, Jason?
I can't possibly improve on what Peter just said. I really, it's about the politics of imagination. I spent a lifetime and a career advocating for a strong Israel-U.S. relationship, and I find myself today not wistful of the time I spent, but rather wondering, moving forward, what the path is, and whether it's this generation of leadership or the next who's ultimately going to resolve our situation in the Middle East. But I am grateful for the tenor of the questions that we've heard, and the fact that people are willing to come together, even if they have disparate viewpoints, to at least have a conversation about what's happening and how to sort of withstand it all.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the audience to thank the panel in the usual manner for great discussion. We hope you've enjoyed today's event. If you have any thoughts, you can do so using @VisitScottParle on X or Instagram @ScottParle, and share your views from today's. Any feedback's really welcome, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Festival of Politics. And I usually try and wind up with a anecdote phrase or something, but today I'm at a loss, basically, to try and encapsulate everything other than I was at a VJ event that told the stories of the Lanarkshire Yeomanry individually in what was probably one of the most difficult hours I've sat through in my constituency. And there is a message of hope out there. You can forgive without forgetting. And I think that's where we all have to move forward. So thank you everyone for your attendance today.